For this next assignment, you are going to need to have your local development environment installed. And remember, we are using MAMP for that. We do not need a paid version. You shouldn't have to pay for anything in this class. Everything that we're going to use is free. And that includes MAMP. So when MAMP downloads, it does come with a pro version, but don't sign up for the trial. Don't choose to try it out. Just stick with the regular version of MAMP. And remember as well that if you are using cloud-based storage like OneDrive or iCloud, you should keep all of your work from now on. You should essentially move the contents of your GRD 188 folder, all of this, into a special folder within the MAMP installation, which is right here called htdocs. So make sure you put all of your GRD 188 folder in here if you are relying on cloud-based storage for your file management, for your backup solutions. Now, if you're not relying on cloud-based storage, then MAMP has an option for you to change the location of your your local development hosting space route, and you can choose a new document route so you can see where I'm navigating to that for mine. That being said, what we're going to learn next is a little bit of a language called PHP. So PHP stands for Hypertext Preprocessor, which is a little strange that the acronym for Hypertext Preprocessor is PHP, but it's what's called a recursive acronym. You don't actually need to know that, so it's really more just trivia. But what PHP does is allows you to work with HTML in a more dynamic way. Now, before we get started with that, let's go ahead and back up our work because this is going to be one of the most dramatic changes you're going to make for your website. So let's create one more backup folder. This time we're going to call it Portfolio-RWD for responsive web design. And we're going to take, again, only the resources that are needed for this website. So that's my CSS folder, my downloads folder, my image folder, my style guide, my template, and my web fonts folder. And I'm going to copy those, and I'm going to create a copy of each of those inside my folder for portfolio.rwd. I can tell that that's working by viewing one of my pages in the browser. And when I do that, as long as it still looks the same, that means that it's connecting to all of my style sheets. That means all my code is there. And when I click on my style guide, I also get there. So if anything's out of place here, it means you might have forgotten to copy a resource. But for the most part, this should be a solid backup for you to keep. Now remember, we're not going to work from this new folder. We're only doing this so that we have the peace of mind that if we break something, we can come back to our work as it was before we began this. We're going to continue working in our GRD 188 folder locally for this assignment. And so what I'm going to do now is just open that folder in Sublime Text as a project so that I can see everything that is in there. And I'm going to do a little bit of file management. Now that my skeleton is working, and I can see that, I can move, delete, or archive all of these skeleton packages that I've got installed. In my CSS folder, I should have 4 style sheets, and I do. The exercises should have all of the resources for those. In my case, I might have some placeholder folders, and you will actually have a full website in those. My downloads folder has a PDF. It may or may not actually be my resume, but it's there as a placeholder so that we can get the functionality in place. My image folder probably only has my annotated screenshot of my workspace and my original. And then my web fonts folder came from Font Awesome. I don't need to do anything to it. And then I have my template.html and I have my styleguide.html. So we're going to start working from here. And trying to think of the best way to go about presenting this information to you. But let's just do a little bit of speculative math, okay? So let's say that we took this template as it is right now, and we thought it was ready to go. So we went ahead and made copies of it for every single page that we were going to have in our navigation, just like we've done for the for the style guide already. And when we make those copies, we would then need to update our navigation so that it worked, right? So right now we've got all of these list items, and they're all using a recursive link, which is just this hashtag. Once we created those pages, in order for that navigation bar to work, we would need to replace this hashtag with the name of each page. Now, obviously doing that on just the template page would require me to make 4 changes. But if I had made all these other 4 pages as well, and the style guide, now we're talking about the template plus style guide, so that's 2, plus these 1, 2, 3, 4 new pages. So we're talking about 6 different pages, and we would need to make sure that we updated these 4 links on all 6 pages. So that suddenly becomes 6 times 4, right? Which is 24. So that's a lot of changes to make. And even that might not sound like that much, but let's say, 6 months down the line, you build out your portfolio a little bit more and you decide you want to break up and have a page for each project. Say you have anywhere from 5 to 10 projects that you want to put on there. Then you suddenly have to change this navigation menu. Maybe you want this to be a drop-down that leads to each project. So you end up creating a more complicated navigation menu. And then suddenly you need to update that for all 6 of these pages plus the 10 new ones. So the problem with working with static HTML is that it's static. It just is what it is. And using it on every page like this means there's a lot of possibility to make a mistake or to miss something. And what happens when we do that, if we have a bunch of different pages, is that they all look similar. But if we're updating the HTML on a one-off for each one of these pages, it's possible that some of these links will work in the nav bar from one page and not from the other, but they might not all be the same. If they're broken on one page, they might work on another, and it can start to cause a lot of problems. It can be really confusing to fix and even more confusing for a user to navigate. So the best way to handle that is, instead of updating each individual page with each individual change for your code, which is what we've been doing for the style guide so far. And I think a lot of you probably can relate to this because you already have changes out of sync between the style guide and the template. And you've gotten that feedback in your work that the two of them don't match. So what happened was you worked from one and forgot to update the other. So your style guide might be working with skeleton in it and the template doesn't even have the link to skeleton, for example. So the best way to handle this is to do something called reducing the need for redundant code, right? Or eliminating the need for redundant code. And what that means is, if we had a way to just put all of the code that we were sure we needed in the same place on every page in our website, which in our case comes down to here, it's essentially everything above the main element and everything below where the main element closes. All needs to be identical on each page. So what if we had a way to put that code in a single file and then just reference that file on every page where we needed it, kind of like how we're doing with these style sheets? And PHP is what gives us the ability to do that. There are other languages that afford us that ability as well, but PHP is a really popular one for a lot of content management systems. And so starting to learn how to use it is helpful even if you are a designer. Now, the good news is we're not going to be getting into too deep with PHP. We're just going to use some of its utilities that allow us to be able to do our design work with less margin for error. But in order to do that, we do need to have that local development environment running on our computer, because our computer's not a web server, and PHP is what's called a server-side language, which means PHP typically only exists on web servers or your hosting space, for example. And so now, yes, you could make these updates and you could move your files back and forth from your computer to your hosting space, but that takes time. And so having a local development environment allows you to simulate a hosting space on your computer so that you can continue working on your computer without having to move things back and forth and without even needing an internet connection to continue working on making your website. So that's what we're going to do next. And I can probably show you a quick example of how that works. So with template HTML, if I open that in browser, you can see how even my local version starts with file, right, and has my folder structure up here. I can see it. Well, let me come back, and very quickly I'm going to take this same page because I need to do this anyway. I'm going to take the same page and I'm going to do a quick save as, and I'm going to put it in my GRD188 folder, but I'm going to change the extension from .html to .php. And now when I do that, even though the files look exactly the same, you can see back and forth, there's no movement, right? These are exactly the same file. All I did was change the extension of the file. But you'll notice that I can no longer open in browser. You see I have Reveal in Finder now, whereas with my HTML I have Open in Browser. And that's because this is a server-side language, so my computer doesn't know how to open it in browser. It doesn't know what to do with it. And then if I tried to just open it in the browser, which I've been able to do with my HTML pages to this point. So if I took this and chose Open with Chrome, my page looks really different. You see how it's just showing me the code? And that's because my browser doesn't know what to do with it because it doesn't have PHP running right now. And so all it does is treats it as a plain text file. And so this would obviously not be a very professional looking result for a website. We want it to look like this when someone navigates to it. But if I were to put that same file on my hosting space, it would show. Let me show you how that works too. So I'm going to go to FileZilla. And I'm going to connect to my hosting space. And let me navigate to, I've got the wrong route set up in my site here from what I told you to do. Okay, so here's this route. I'm going to put template.php over here on my hosting space to where now this same file, if I navigate to lhughes.cpccagd.com/template.php, you'll see that the file loads. It looks like I still need to update my hosting space to include some of my other resources. So I need to add my CSS folder, which may be empty. Let's see if that fixes some of it. And you can see now it's starting to show up. It still doesn't have all of the style sheets, but skeleton's starting to come through. So some of these things that were cached are starting to show up. So the point is that if I want to be able to work on this as efficiently as possible, working on it locally and simulating that web server is going to be the most helpful way for me to do that. Let me come back and see why that wasn't doing what I expected it to do here. Let's see. Let's try again. I think it might have just been a caching issue. Yeah, okay. So with the cache cleared, this is my public version. You can see it looks exactly like the HTML version of my local one, but this is the PHP page. So the point is that my web host has PHP and it's able to use that language, but my computer doesn't by default. That's why we needed the local development environment, so that we could just save time. It really slows you down to have to work on your computer and then move everything to your hosting space every single time you want to see if a change that you made worked. So what we're going to do now is continue working using PHP. I'm going to do that in a different video since this one's already gotten to about 15 minutes. So just join me in the next video and we will start using PHP to simplify our code so that we have less margin for error.